Hello, friends. This is your friend Kent C. Dodds, and I'm joined by my friend Erik Rasmussen. Say hi, Erik.
Hello, Kent. It's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you too. Erik is a maintainer of open source, and that's what we're going to be talking about today: is the open source maintenance and authoring open source libraries, managing open source communities, that kind of thing. But I want the audience to get to know Erik a little bit. So, Erik, could you just introduce yourself and tell us about you before we get into our chat?
Sure. I'm an American from North Carolina who has been living in Spain for the past 14 years because I married a Spanish woman. And my day job is working with Java applications, but on the side I love playing around with JavaScript and increasingly TypeScript and the React community. I've been involved with React since the day it was released by Facebook, building little side projects and
Mm.
things. And it's just and at one point, for some reason, I decided to open source a form library that I found useful to manage form states in Redux, and it sort of exploded and became very, very popular. And over the course of that time, I have learned an awful lot about the different use cases that different corporations all over the world have with forms. Things that never would have occurred to me when I was solving my own little problem with forms. And so I don't know. I find it very rewarding to help people with their problems in the open source community. It's been I can't really explain it because there's no money in it for sure, uh, but it's nice to give back, I guess is the way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. Like, and people who are listening who haven't really experienced that, they can maybe get a little taste by remembering like building a good abstraction in your work project that's other people start using this function that you made and it's saving them time, and just multiply that by like thousands because that building an abstraction that so many people can use and save them time and improve the maintenance of their app is really rewarding. It's super cool. So the you wrote the React Redux final form, right? It's what are you have two form libraries, one that's a Redux thing and then one that's just kind of standalone. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yes, Redux Form is the big one. It's by far the most used form library in React still. Uh, and it was sort of my first attempt at managing form state at a higher level because the React docs are only ever show you how to manage pretty much the form state of one input. And if you think about it, what's the company that makes React? How many inputs do they have in their form? Facebook really only has one form input in any particular form, right? It's
Yeah.
your status update or it's your reply to the comment thread. So they haven't put a lot of or they haven't published a lot of thought about how to manage a form with 25 inputs. Um, and so it was clear that the form the the form state had to live up higher above the in the parent of the forms of the inputs. And at the time, Redux was just becoming popular as a way to manage state even higher at the application level. And so I wrote I wrote a reducer to manage form states, and it worked pretty well. But what happened was, and we can get into this with open source maintenance, is people kept coming to me with additional use cases. And what if it did this? And I need this many. I need to make it dynamic, where I don't know all the inputs that I'm going to have when I first mount the form, or I need an array of fields and things like this. And so the form library itself kept growing and growing and growing to the point where the bundle size sort of got out of hand, and uh, and saying yes to all the requests for features created this sort of monster. So that's the first one, and I, having seen all of these use cases and problems with form UI that people needed solving, I took a step back and looked at how, you know, is there a better way? And that's when I came up with my second form library called Final Form, or React Final Form is the React version of it, where
Hmm.
it's, rather than holding states in Redux or even in component state, Final Form is a standalone form state container that it gives you a way to add fields, and it will manage the values of those fields, and it will do run validation, and it will manage the errors of validation and the submit errors and things like that. All the stuff that you need with managing form state. Uh, and it's in this self-contained zero dependency pure JavaScript library. And then once I had that, I was able to build this little thin veneer over it for React, to hook it into React uh, with connecting on mount to register the form and put the form in the context, and get the
Mhm.
and allow the field components to register themselves. And so that's my two form libraries are Redux Form and React Final Form.
And which one has your heart right now?
Oh, for sure, the newer one, uh,
Mhm.
React Final Form. I I pretty actively recommend that people migrate, and in fact, just this week I published a migration guide, uh, and
Mhm.
it turns out that because both were written by the same person, the API is really quite similar. Like, it doesn't. It's so easy to migrate. I've so many people have told me that they migrated and it was just trivial to do,
Mhm.
and it's way better on your bundle size. It's like from 26K down to 8K. So
Oh, wow, nice. Cool. So it sounds like a really interesting learning process for you as getting into open source and having a wildly popular library. I don't know if you know, but in the Angular JS days, I published and maintained the Angular Formly library. And that
yes,
was it's probably still the most widely used forms library in Angular JS, as much, whatever that means. But yeah, so I know the pains of forms and people's constant requests, and it's just so easy to say yes because like especially as you're the maintainer, how to accomplish what it is that they're trying to do,
hmm,
and maybe there's a workaround for it, but it's like really hacky, and so you're just like, oh, I'll just make that easier, and you start adding specific use cases or support for very specific use cases in the library, and it just grows and grows and grows. You have a lot of if statements
yep,
in the library to handle all these different options and things, and it can become a bit of a weight on your shoulders. Did you ever feel like you were like burned out on these libraries and maintaining this as and then responding to all of the people's requests and often it's not just like a hey, I need this new feature, but it's like, how do you use your library? And I obviously didn't read the manual, so like it can get easy to get worn out. Did you ever feel that way?
I had some times when, yes, there were a bunch of issues and uh, a bunch of people you saying, +1 on the issue, which is always helpful. Uh, and But I don't know. I think I managed the burnout fairly well. There have been times when I take a whole week and I don't even look at the open source stuff, because otherwise you're just, if you get up every morning and look at all the issues and look at all the Stack Overflow questions, uh, it can become, you know like as stressful as a job, and a job that pays zero. So that's not healthy. But uh, and for sure, you get to a point where you can no longer uh, look at every issue, or stay up to date with your GitHub notifications. For goodness sake, that's
Mhm.
just if you if you have a library that's at all popular, your GitHub notifications are just mm, worthless noise. But
Mm.
I do check on the issues. Really, GitHub needs a better way to vote on issues. Like some of the bug tracking software out there, like Jira and whatnot, that have voting on issues. Uh, it would be helpful for library maintainers if there was a way to see that this particular issue in the list had so many upvotes or whatever. But alas,
Mhm.
we can't do that. We just have to look through the issues and see where where the most comments are or something. But no, there were times where I had to just step away and go for a walk and do something else. But I feel like I've maintained a fairly sane level of uh, open source communication. I don't know.
Yeah, I can definitely like I feel that pretty strongly as well with my open source projects that I have. It can be a bit of a pain. Well, one thing that I found that can be really useful is building a community around the project and finding people who can help maintain and triage issues, and also finding a place where you can just like move support requests off of GitHub. And so it's, like the community learns that, oh, GitHub is not the place to do support. That's where I file issues or request features. And so like that's where I have Spectrum. And so if somebody does ask a question, typically I or one of the other maintainers will redirect them to Spectrum, and that's been really helpful. Have you done anything like? Do you find in your maintenance of your projects that lots of the issues are actually just support requests?
Yeah, and I think in my you know contributing document, I try and point people towards Stack Overflow first, because especially with Redux Form, there's so many people that use it, and so many times I will get to a Stack Overflow question, and it'll already be answered. It'll already have the check mark of the someone that has correctly answered it. So uh, it's the community comes with popularity, and it's great that some people want to help each other out when using your library. I haven't really jumped into Spectrum all that much. It's I don't know. It's yeah. With I've been sending people to Stack Overflow mostly, but
Hmm.
then people will also answer each other's issues on GitHub. So
Hmm.
I don't know which is better. There's still no solid solution on a good way, in my opinion. I haven't seen a great way to manage a an open source community around a library.
Hmm.
So
So what makes you do it then? I'm curious. Like if it's such a challenge, is it worth the effort, and why is it worth the effort for you?
well, it's very rewarding to have someone say, you know, oh, thank you. My entire team was blocked on this. We couldn't fulfill our requirements for this project. And from what I've in my experience, the library consumers, the other developers, are very grateful for a library. They understand that you're saving them a whole bunch of time by releasing this code, and
Mm,
they're very just grateful. And it's nice to I don't know. It just feels good to help other people. I can't really put it any more more succinctly than that.
Yeah, that's there's like intrinsic reward for being a somebody who basically your code is running in way more apps than you could possibly build yourself.
Oh yeah, that's another kind of cool thing that will blow your mind is when you have a million monthly downloads, you know that so many projects out there are using your code, and it's always kind of fun where sometimes I'll be using a website and I'll be like, oh, this form works pretty nice, and I'll inspect, I'll view the source, and turns out, oh, it's using my library. So that's always fun to spot your work in the wild. But
hmm
I've heard whenever, especially when you go to a conference or something, people will come up to you and be like, "Oh yeah, this multinational bank that I work for has been using your library for a couple years now," and that just kind of blows your mind that so many people out there and are running code that you wrote, which again, it doesn't pay the bills, but it's neat to know that you've helped.
Yeah, well, and then there's also the added benefit of having more experience, right? Like you're certainly a better React developer having been exposed to so many different use cases,
Definitely.
and recognizing, oh, like maybe at your job you're exposed to different use cases, but then somebody else has a particular way that they're using forms and they're trying to retrofit your library to fit their use case and it just doesn't work and so they open an issue and now you've been exposed to a totally different way of building forms or using forms on the web. And so if you hadn't open sourced it, then you wouldn't have been exposed to that kind of thing and now
Exactly.
because you are, you're more capable.
Yes, it certainly broadens your horizons or your understanding of what people might need a React component to do. And again, the other thing about solving other people's problems is, one of the reasons that we love what we do is that we love the problem solving part of, here's a can we get this to do this, and how can we figure out a way to accomplish this, and that's just fun. I mean, uh,
Hmm.
especially sometimes someone will come with an issue and say, hey, how can I get my form to do this, and I will, without even trying, I'll have the I'll I'll come up with a solution, and then it's hard because then it's like this person can't see the answer, but you with your experience have, and now you have to take the time to explain it to them or implement
Mhm.
it or whatever. Um, but it's I don't know, the reason I love programming is problem solving and the creative ways that we
Mhm.
can make code the best it can be.
Yeah, and it is kind of fun to, like, take their and this is something that I did a lot with Angular formerly is our website was basically just a ton of examples, and all of those examples came from when I would answer somebody's question, I'd give them this example, and then I'd put it on the website, and instead of sending them a link to the JS bin, which is what we were using back then, I would put it on the website and then send them a link to the website. And so, like after a while, you had like tons of examples, and it was kind of a fun challenge. Like every single time, how do I demonstrate this feature in a way that balances the line between contrived and real world, so that people
Hmm.
can um, like see the forest through the trees or whatever and understand what is the key element that I'm trying to demonstrate here, but also how does this apply in a real world scenario, and it is challenging, but it's challenging in a good way.
Yeah, and that was one of the ways that I built React Final Form was that I had a list in my head of all these different ways that people needed forms to be built. And so I built there are dozens of examples in the React Final Form docs of doing exactly what you said. Of course,
Mm,
nowadays we use Code Sandbox, but it's I need a wizard form. Okay, how do you build a wizard form? Or I need a way to have some fields disappear when another field is a certain value. Things like this, where because I, even though in my jobby job, I never really had some of these requirements. I knew that those requirements existed out there because I had maintained Redux Form for so long,
Hmm.
and so I was able to go and build all of these examples, and I found bugs in my library, and I made sure that my library could support all of these examples, and that's such a great way to teach people how to use your library. I always say I like to refer to Next.js. One of the things I love about their repo is you can go to the examples directory, and there there's 50 examples of how to use different other libraries with all the CSS and JS libraries. There's an example of how to do it with how to use other libraries in Next, and that gives me the confidence that whatever future libraries I'm gonna need, the people at Zeit are going to work out how to use that with their system, and uh, it's just nice to see so many examples. And whenever your use case comes up and there's a whole bunch of examples, you can oftentimes find a pretty close match to what it is you're trying to
Hmm.
do and pull that example in and learn how to do it. It's way easier than, I don't know, trying to read long prose in documentation, I think.
Yeah, I agree. You talked about with Redux Form that people kept on bringing their use cases and it would just bloat the library. And
Yep.
and there are some problems with that where it's like the bundle size, but also the cognitive load on anybody who's trying to learn this library. There's just such a huge API. Um, but then you kind of re-implemented all those use cases in final form, but the bundle size is lower, and I'm assuming that the API surface layer area is probably lower as well. So can you talk a little bit about how do I take a use case that somebody has and ensure that I can not only like that I can support it without increasing the bundle size or the surface area of the library? Do you have any tips for that?
Well, one of the design goals of Final Form from the beginning was to keep the bundle size minimal. And so the way I did that was I created this sort of plug-in architecture where you could you could install this other library that worked well with Final Form, that gave you, for example, the ability to handle arrays of fields, whereas your default install of Final Form and React Final Form isn't going to handle arrays of fields, but there's this other thing you can install that will allow that. And I really like that architecture because it's like you're building your own form library with these Lego bricks every time to fit whatever your use case is. And especially now with code splitting and things, you can use a smaller version of Final Form for your login page, but then when you have to actually go to edit your account or whatever, you can have the extra code that makes that possible. So
Mm.
from the very beginning, I wanted to make it flexible so that additional functionality could be added on like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that like kind of plugin architecture is really kind of a challenge, but it obviously is a really great way to make a library extensible is by um, kind of inverting control a little bit and giving people the ability to extend the capabilities of the core library.
Yep.
It's kind of actually what Babel went through when they switched from everything built in to Babel 5, where everything was a plugin. Like I can't even imagine going back from that and saying, okay, every Babel plugin is now built into Babel. Like that would just be a total nightmare. So it eases the maintenance chore for you. And when somebody comes to you with the use case that you just hadn't never thought of before, you can say, well, you can build a plugin and you don't have to make any changes to the library. So it just reduces the maintenance and also makes the library more capable to handle use cases that were never really considered or are frankly not really popular or frequently used use cases.
Right, your edge cases, like you don't, because with Redux Form, for example, you your user has to download all of the code to manage complex arrays of fields, even if you're just having even if you just have two fields on the page, and
Hmm.
that just seems dumb. You should if you can, uh, you should just have them download the core thing that they need to manage your minimal form state, and then if you need additional functionality, you can add extra code to your bundle.
Hmm. Yeah, and so cool. So if I'm thinking like I've got a utility in mind that I want to open source, what's the process of getting that code open source? Like I want to increase the impact of this code, and I want other people to use this. How do I go about effectively, open sourcing this code in a way that will, make that positive impact that I want?
Right. Well, I mean, you you, you make it public on GitHub and you npm publish with a good README. Your README should explain your motivation, why this is useful, and show a quick bit of code that makes it clear how this is used. But and
Hmm.
then um, sometimes people ask me, "Hey, I've open sourced this thing that I think is really useful. How do I get people to use it?"
Hmm.
And that's a hard question to answer because you just like I the other day someone asked me that on Twitter, and the best response I could come up with is, I guess, just look for, do a Twitter search for people discussing the kind of problem that your library solves, and then maybe sort of butt in and as humbly as possible say, "Oh, I had that problem and I wrote this little thing. You can use it if you want." Uh, it's you. It, it's kind of rude to go to your to any mention of a competitor and say, "Hey, why don't you use my thing that I wrote?" Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
because I'm sure you've seen plenty of that. Um,
Uh-huh.
but it's just, and again, if people use your thing or they don't, you're not you're not you're not losing anything if someone switches from your library to someone else's library. If anything, you're losing, the having to maintain,
Yeah, the support cost.
another user, right? uh, but on the other hand, it's gratifying to have people use your stuff. So uh, it's it's complicated. If it's really useful, people will use it.
Hmm.
I don't have anything
It Yeah, typically it
else.
happens kind of organically. Like when you have really good documentation, like really good examples, and you're solving a problem that people really are
Yes.
experiencing, then typically it's going to be used. Often, it does take having somebody um, who has some sort of following to use it, really like it, and share it with people.
Yes.
That can be really helpful. Eventually, if it is actually solving people's problems, then that will likely happen. That actually happened to the Webpack project when Pete Hunt decided it was a good idea.
I love that
Um,
talk. That was a world changing talk when he that you should link to that. That's great. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So like so for your library to really take off, it often does need some sort of help in that direction.
Yeah.
But I typically don't find libraries that are um, not well documented get to take off like that. That's kind
For
of a
sure.
rare case.
Yes.
So
Documentation
yeah.
is key. And explain,
Hmm.
like I said, explaining the motivation at the very top of your
Hmm.
README should be why I built this and what problem it solves.
Hmm.
And if because if you I've seen so many libraries where I look around and it's like, what does this even do? Um,
Hmm.
and you're right that if you can get someone like Kensey Dodds to retweet you, then you
Yeah.
you'll be off to the races.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just wanna be careful because people keep asking me to retweet their Redux, state management middleware or their Redux killer or whatever. I'm not
Hmm.
interested in that stuff.
Right.
I don't use that stuff, so you need to find somebody who is experiencing the problem that you're solving, and who
Right.
is just entrenched in this, kind of problem. Um, yeah, because if they're not, then like, yeah, maybe they can retweet it, but they can't really say anything about it. And especially people who have a big following don't want to share something with everybody that follows them that they don't really know about, that they haven't vetted, and they
Yeah.
often don't have time to vet the project anyway. So that's why having really great documentation is key, because I do sometimes feel comfortable when I go through the documentation. I get a really like, and I've only got like 60 seconds to do this, so I get a really clear picture of what it does, and it looks like a pretty smart idea. Then I'm fine tweeting that and saying, "Hey, this looks like it could be a good idea,"
Hmm.
and then then it's your job as the maintainer of the library to take those eyeballs that I've given you and turning those into users of the project, and hopefully contributors of the project as well. Um, so yeah, if
Yeah. And as soon as
sorry, go ahead.
you launch your thing, you need to be willing to put in time to look at issues and fix bugs and add features, because if you do get some eyeballs, you're going to get people saying, uh, hey, can it do this in this case? And you're going to get requests and or where people find bugs, and the more on top of that you can be, the better chance you're going to have to actually get your thing off the ground. If you open source something and then don't look at it for a couple months and people come and complain and nothing happens, then you're gonna lose those people. You got to be uh, there on the ground, ready to make those quick fixes as people give them to you.
Yeah, great. So, Eric, as we're wrapping up here, I think that our call to action for people for this episode should be to release some open source software, and it doesn't have to be like the solution to date pickers on the web or something like that. That might be a little ambitious for your first open source project. It could be just like a little utility function that you found to be really useful for yourself, and it's if this is your first time, it's less about getting a lot of users and more about learning the process of open sourcing some software, which I think will help you develop some empathy for open source maintainers, help you understand what the process of releasing software is like, which I think everybody should really learn about. And I can give people one resource that I've made, and then maybe Eric, if you have some resources and ideas, then that could be helpful. But I have this free course on Egghead called "How to Write an Open Source JavaScript Library," where I show you the process of open sourcing a library on there on npm, and so you can watch that course, and that could help you get something open sourced. Do you have any other tips or ideas of how to help people get their utility open sourced?
I've lost track of the number of times when I've Googled how to do something and I come up with a Kent Dodds video explaining exactly how to do the one thing that I'm trying to do. It really, you've been so helpful. No, your video is probably a great place to start. Um, the other thing I wanted to add was, right now we're at a time when uh, with React hooks, there's so there's such a lot of, you can release a really useful hook that composes a couple of React things, and uh, there's a lot of useful things that can be released as a hook these days that that because hooks are so relatively young, there's still a bunch of cool stuff that we're going to discover of a common hook use case that if you can think of something clever you know that solves some particular problem with hooks, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still like a pretty young ecosystem there, so there's a lot of opportunity. Very cool, Eric. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. I hope that people learn to create some open source software and what management of open source is like. It is super rewarding. It's also super challenging, which is, I guess, maybe part of the reason why it's so rewarding. Kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, as we wrap up, Eric, what are the best ways for people to get in touch with you if they have any questions or anything?
Well, I'm at Erik Ras on Twitter, ErikRas, and my my final form library is at final-form.org, and uh, any of those places, Twitter is the most direct route to get in contact with me, and I would love to hear feedback from everybody. So,
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll say goodbye and we'll see you all later. Bye.
bye.